10 billionaires who became bankrupt. People often think that once a person hits the billionaire status, they'll never have to worry about money again. It takes money to accumulate more money, and with billions in the bank, that cash generation will be incredibly high. Well, that's not always the case, with several famous billionaires who made mistakes and spent too much, which resulted in the biggest business sin, bankruptcy. From poor investments to getting caught up in fraud, here comes 10 billionaires who became bankrupt. Number 10. Donald Trump. Former President Donald Trump has experienced bankruptcy several times, despite never actually filing for it personally. With that being said, he's filed for bankruptcy on several of his companies. The most infamous of these cases was the Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City, which was declared bankrupt back in 1991 after it failed to pay interest payments to bondholders. This was also the case with the Plaza Hotel in New York. Other companies filed for bankruptcy by Trump was a string of Trump hotels and casino resorts in 2004, which had amassed $1.8 billion in debt, as well as his Trump Entertainment Resort in 2009. Despite his failures in business, Donald Trump still went on to become the President of the United States, having a say in the country's business management strategies. Number 9. Walt Disney. Walt Disney started from humble beginnings, but used his entrepreneurial drive to become one of the most famous names in the entertainment industry. Despite his incredible legacy, however, Walt Disney once filed for bankruptcy in 1921 after his company, Laugh-O-Gram Studios, lost its main backer as they went bankrupt themselves. At the time, Walt had hired several animators who he could no longer pay. In 1923, Walt managed to secure a loan from his family, which led him to starting a brand new company. In 1928, Walt Disney found success with his most famous creation, Mickey Mouse. Walt wasn't out of stormy seas, however, as his first feature-length film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, caused the company to hemorrhage money. In fact, the film cost $1.5 million to make, which was triple the original budget. Because of the financial troubles, the film was almost never finished. Before he had to file for bankruptcy again, Walt managed to secure a bank loan, which meant the film could be completed. Phew! Lucky the film was a huge hit and grossed $6.5 million in profit, which led to other Disney classics that cemented his fortune. When Walt Disney passed away in 1966, he was worth $5 billion. Keeping in mind that this was in the 60s, that value would be worth incredibly more in terms of today's money. Number 8. Jocelyn Wildenstein. Jocelyn Wildenstein once owned billions, but after a messy divorce, she lost everything. In May 2018, Wildenstein, the former wife of famous art dealer Alec Wildenstein, filed for bankruptcy. In fact, the socialite admitted that she had no income except for the $900 Social Security payments in money loaned to her by family and friends. The reason for her financial downfall was the result of her divorce settlements, despite being awarded $2.5 billion in the divorce. She was even given 2 paintings, but one of them, which was the work of Diego Velázquez, turned out to be a fake, while the other, painted by Paul Cézanne, was sold for much less than it was worth. The story of Jocelyn Wildenstein is a stark reminder to everyone that it is essential to live within your means and not continue a lifestyle because you believe you deserve it. Number 7. Vijay Mallya. Vijay Mallya was once a billionaire who lost his fortune after committing financial fraud and committing avoidance tactics. This led to the extradition of the businessman, where he was called back to India to face his string of fraud charges. Mallya began making his fortune after inheriting his father's company at 28 years of age. He took the modest company and made it a multi-billion-dollar company, which amassed Mallya an impressive $1.5 million fortune. At the peak of his career, Vijay Mallya started Kingfisher Airlines, which multiplied his already incredible wealth and funded his lavish lifestyle. While things were looking good from the outside, however, the internal affairs of the company were amassing crippling debts that led to Kingfisher Airlines closing down in 2012. Behind the scenes, Mallya was using the company to perform fraudulent acts to benefit himself. In order to try and get the failing company back on the right track, Mallya tried to take his airline overseas. Unfortunately, according to the law, an airline must prove itself financially before expanding to international markets. To try and avoid this rule, Mallya purchased a low-cost airline company already operating internationally. But as the 2008 financial crisis struck, it resulted in the businessman being unable to pay back the huge loans, as well as the upkeep of his companies. Number 6. Ike Batista. Ike Batista's goal was to become the richest man on the planet, but unfortunately for him, the aspirations fell short in 2013 when his oil company, OGX, went bankrupt. Batista had made his fortune all by himself and was known for his lavish lifestyle. Ike was worth an eye-watering $30 billion in 2012, which landed him as the 7th richest person on the planet. Just a year later, however, OGX fell into bankruptcy after the company failed to keep up with demands. The decline of the business seemed suspicious to officials, who then discovered that Batista had been engaging in money laundering, corruption, and fraud. In 2018, the billionaire was sentenced to 30 years in prison for bribing the governor of Rio de Janeiro, Sergio Cabral. In 2020, however, Batista made a deal with the authorities to pay back $160 million and spend just 4 years behind bars. The money that was paid was put to good use, as it was used to fund treatment for COVID in Brazil. Number 5. Alan Stanford. Like Bernard Madoff, Alan Stanford was the leader of the second largest investor fraud in U.S. history. Unlike Madoff, however, Stanford never paid any of his 8,000 clients a single penny in compensation. The crime Stanford committed started after his fitness club in Texas was declared bankrupt, which led to a huge offshore banking scam that targeted the elderly to invest in his safe investment opportunities. This turned out to be a charade. When the officials raided the headquarters of the Stanford Financial Group, they discovered the full extent of the fraud. It was also discovered that Stanford was using the money to fund his lifestyle, with none of it being invested as promised. Alan Stanford had conned $7 billion from his investors and was found guilty of 13 felony counts of fraud. In 2012, he was sentenced to 110 years behind bars with no chance of being released. Number 4. Patricia Kluge. At one time, Patricia Kluge was the definition of high society before losing every penny she had during the 2008 housing market crash. Patricia was a former heiress and model who met her second husband, John W. Kluge, while in New York. Her husband was, in fact, worth a whopping $5 billion in 1981, but just 9 years into their marriage, they split. This left Patricia with a $1 million a year settlement. This was the start of Patricia's downfall. Patricia eventually started her own winery and vineyard on her 960 acre of land with her third husband, William Moses. Her business was a success, which even saw the company serving their wine at Chelsea Clinton's wedding, the only child of Bill Clinton. After a series of unfortunate investments into her estate, she lost it all during the 2008 housing market crisis. In 2011, Donald Trump bought the winery for a fraction of its worth from the Bank of America, who had seized the asset against her debts. In a desperate attempt, Patricia tried selling off her valuable jewelry, but it wasn't enough, and she was declared bankrupt in 2011. Number 3. Sean Quinn. Sean Quinn had earned the title of the wealthiest man in Ireland before losing his $3 billion empire. Quinn had built his empire through his family quarry, which he then evolved into manufacturing, real estate, construction, and power plants. Quinn showed no signs of slowing down when it came to gaining wealth, until a poor investment in the Anglo-Irish Bank resulted in him losing everything he owned. Quinn frantically tried to save a portion of his money by taking a sum out of his insurance company, but as the assets were in freefall, the funds were untouchable. Eventually, the Anglo-Irish Bank was bailed out by the government, which used taxpayers' money to secure the failing business. In 2011, Sean Quinn filed for bankruptcy with just $60,000 left in his bank account. While this still seems like a considerable amount of money for the average person, for a man who once owned $3 billion in assets and personal finance, it was a devastating hit for the entrepreneur. Number 2. Bjørgolfur Gudmundsson. In 2008, Bjørgolfur Gudmundsson was the world's richest people, acting as the chairman and primary owner of the second largest bank in the whole of Iceland. But during the financial crisis of 2008, which also hit several other billionaires on our list, Gudmundsson Bank took a huge hit, which led to its collapsing in just a few months. In order to protect the finances of those banking with Gudmundsson, the government seized it, which wiped out the entirety of the billionaire's wealth. At one point, he even owned London's West Ham United Football Club. But when Gudmundsson was forced to admit that he was hundreds of millions in debt, he filed for bankruptcy and had to give up all of his assets, including his beloved Premier League football team. In December of that same year, Gudmundsson's $1.2 billion fortune was reduced to nothing. While the rest of his family was affected by the bankruptcy, unbelievably, his son, Thor Gudmundsson, managed to generate a fortune, something his father struggled to do. Number 1. Bernard Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff hit global headlines for being the leader of the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. Bernard managed to go undetected for years before finally being caught in December 2008. Before the truth came out and Madoff was sent to prison, he and his wife had a combined worth of $1.5 billion. To most people, Bernard was a trustworthy businessman who found success with his Wall Street firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC, which was started in the 60s. The large Ponzi scheme came to light when investors asked for $7 billion in returns, a request the firm couldn't do. It turned out that Bernard Madoff had swindled over $60 billion from his investors, with $20 billion ending up in his bank account. He was eventually tried for 11 counts of fraud, theft, perjury, and mass money laundering. This resulted in the entrepreneur being sentenced to 150 years in prison. This means the fraudster will spend the rest of his life behind bars, penniless and disgraced. Many people think that making money is the hardest part of being successful, but in truth, it's keeping the money that is the most challenging thing. If you have enjoyed this video and would like to see more business topics covered on Daily Joy Time, make sure you hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out.